Hello folks, and welcome back to Podium Quick Tips. Now in this video we're just going to take a quick look at the new cloud domes and panoramic background images that were just added to Podium Browser. So let's go ahead and get started. If we open up Podium Browser, you can see under the Environment tab that we've added three new subcategories. We've got our 360-degree cloud domes, which are half-spherical pieces of geometry that you can drop into your scene to add realistic clouds to your sky. And then to complement those, we've also added 180-degree and 360-degree background images that were shot with a fisheye lens. And these are just meant to help you fill up your horizons and make the transition from sky to ground a little bit more seamless, a little bit smoother. So let's flip back to SketchUp and see how these are used. So for the sake of demonstration, I've just opened up this test scene. As you can see, we've just got one of the houses from Podium Browser, a car, some fences, and then very basic outline of a neighborhood, which is pretty empty right now. But it's a good demonstration of how these cloud domes and background images can be useful. One of the tricky things about exterior panoramas is that you've got a 360-degree field of view that you need to fill. So the cloud domes and 360-degree image planes can really help with that and make your image a lot more believable. And you might be thinking, well, I could just render with transparency and then add a sky and add a background in post-production. And that's true, but there are some advantages to using actual image planes within SketchUp. The nice thing about the cloud domes and panoramic backgrounds is that they're going to provide realistic reflections for your scene. If I rendered this image right now, the car and the windows wouldn't reflect anything except for the fence and the ground, basically, because the sky is white. So one of the nice things about the cloud domes is that they are going to provide reflections for your scene. If we just switch over to this chrome ball, you can tell that it's chrome, but without an environment to reflect, it doesn't look super realistic. If we add a cloud dome and some trees, all of a sudden that's looking a lot more believable. And that's one of the benefits that these cloud domes and image planes are going to provide. Because if I'd added that sky and tree line in post-production, we wouldn't have ended up with any of these nice reflections on the actual sphere. It just would have been blank, as in this render. Okay, so now that you've got a bit of context, let's go ahead and talk about how to set these up in your model. So let's go back into Podium Browser under Environment, and we're just going to grab one of the backgrounds first because I think it's a little bit easier to show. I'm just going to grab the 360-degree tree background, let that download. And then as you can see, if I zoom out here, it's just a full 360-degree image plane with trees. So obviously in a production render for a client, we'd want to be a little bit more careful about the way we set this up, but for the sake of demonstration, I'm just going to drop it right here in the scene, zoom in a little bit, and we're going to need to bring it down to the horizon. I think something like that will do. And then let's go back into Podium Browser and get one of the cloud domes. Okay, so as you can see, we've got a nice range of clouds to choose from, sort of ranging from these really light, wispy cirrus and stratus clouds to some fluffier, more overcast cumulus clouds. And the stratus clouds are going to be a bit easier to use. They let more light through, so they're easier to use at dawn, dusk, pretty much with any SketchUp sun and shadow settings. They're going to look pretty decent. You might have to experiment a little bit more with the cumulus clouds. They're going to block a little bit more sunlight, so you'll have to play around with the exposure and intensity sliders until you get a result that you like. But I'm going to go ahead and download the cumulus light into the scene, and we'll go from there. Great, so as you can see, the cloud domes are just a half sphere piece of geometry that we can drop right into our model. So I'm going to position that right over our house here. And obviously, this can if you know there's some clouds on this side and your camera's going to be facing this direction, this can be rotated around. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as is. But we do want to make sure that our dome isn't positioned too high in the sky because we don't want to see the line. We don't want to see the transition between sky and ground. We want that to be smooth and hidden. Obviously, the 360-degree tree line is going to help with that, but in this case, we can just grab the dome and bring it a little bit lower. You can sink it below the horizon if you need to, but in this case, I'm just going to leave it right about here. Okay, so let's talk about render settings. The first thing to keep in mind is that these cloud domes, they're not HDRI sky domes, and this is not image-based lighting. These are meant to be used with the Podium physical sky system. It'll work with either 1 or 2, but the tone mapping on physical sky 2 is more accurate, so we're going to go with that. The one other thing, and I'm using exterior default 2.0. Obviously, if you need a really high quality render, you can use exterior high, but for the sake of this test render, I'm just going to use default. These cloud domes, if we look at the material, it's 95% diffuse and 5% transparency. So it is going to block some of the light from your scene, and it's also going to cast shadows in your scene, which obviously, if this is causing problems for you, you can turn shadow casting off, but in the real world, clouds do cast shadows, so we leave that on by default. But the fact that it's blocking some of the light means that we're probably going to have to use, our intensity sliders and at least bring them up to around here. For this one, I'm just going to go all the way up and see what happens. So those are the basic render settings. You want to use Physical Sky 2, bump up the intensity and exposure, and use one of the exterior presets. And then one last thing to note is that the brightness of these clouds is going to depend on whether or not they're in sunlight or in shadow. So right now, in this scene, the SketchUp shadows are kind of coming from left to right. So the clouds on this side of the sky are going to be pretty brightly illuminated because they're directly in the path of the sun, whereas the clouds behind us are going to be a lot darker, because they're basically in shadow. The clouds are between the sun and the earth, so this face that's facing us is in shadow, while these clouds on the right side are going to be lit up. And the other thing, this is sort of a quirk of the sky domes, is that the overall brightness of the clouds, for some reason, is affected by the size of the dome. So typically, this is the default dome size right out of Podium browser. But typically, if you take the dome and scale it up, it's going to make the clouds appear brighter in the final image. That's just something you're going to have to experiment with until you get a result that you like. So real quick, I'm just going to pause the video and reposition the camera, and then we can make a test render. Okay, so I swung the camera around and just widened the field of view a little bit so we can see more of the sky, and ended up with this. So, it's not perfect. The sky actually is a little bit overexposed, so what we could do is come in and bring the intensity and exposure down a little bit, or adjust the shadow and sun angle in the scene. But for a quick try, just thrown together on the spot, it's really not a bad start. We're getting some nice reflections right here on the glass, and the sky is looking pretty natural. So I think that's going to be a good place to wrap it up. I know this went pretty long, but I really hope it helps you get started with the Podium browser cloud domes. I know we covered kind of a lot of information, so all of this stuff is going to be available on the web page just beneath the video here. So scroll down, read through, reference it when you need it, and definitely experiment with the cloud domes. I think these are going to be a really nice asset to have for exterior shots, and especially for exterior panoramas. So Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, never hesitate to post on the forums, and have a good day.